Hello, and welcome back to the Original Medicine Podcast. On this week's episode, we're talking about what our tattoos are telling us. And I love this topic. It's so interesting to me because it encompasses a discussion of the low channels. The low channels are the ones that we bleed to release pathology, and they really offer profound results. If you follow me on Instagram, you've absolutely seen me do this in my videos because I think that people need to see that it's not quite as scary and barbaric as it sounds when you first hear the word bleed. In modern acupuncture circles, people most often are trying to prevent their patients from bleeding, and especially to prevent their patients from seeing that blood because generally speaking, people are afraid of needles, they're afraid of blood. This is like a common phobia, but this is absolutely the opposite of what I'm trying to do when I'm using the low channels, and I'm going to get into that as well. So let's dive in. Okay, first of all, let's talk about what the low channels are. As I mentioned, they are the channels that form when our bodies need a place to put pathology. Now, pathology in this case is most often emotional experiences that we don't have the skills or capacity to deal with at the time. It could be something really big that happens and you just cannot process it at the time. It could be that you get really bad news and you have to go back to work or go back into a meeting and you just literally don't have the physical space to cry or get angry or whatever the expression might be. So these are very normal experiences that we all have at some point in life. And so what happens is that the body sees this as a threat to its very survival. So it says to you, I'm just going to take that experience that you just had and I'm going to shunt it over here and put it in the low channel for you. So I'm going to make some extra vessels for you and I'm going to use your blood to store it there and it'll be good. And then in, some amount of time, you'll get to it, you'll get to process this and things will be great. Except for years come and go and you haven't had the time, the space, or maybe you didn't have the skills to learn how to process that experience that you had, the emotions that resulted, and even the skills to understand the thought process behind what led you to that emotion. That's a really critical component there as well. So as I mentioned, the low channels exist when there is a problem that needs to be held. And so it can take that pathology and hold it away for you, which is great. But when it does that, it's going to form vessels. So when we start seeing varicose veins, spider veins, broken capillaries, this can also be like red or dark areas. Even a bruise can be considered a low channel issue. This is how we diagnose low channels in classical Chinese medicine. So like someone who comes in and has a rash all over their body, for example, we would look at where that rash is showing up on their body. This is really the one time where we were looking at the location of a problem and equating that to a channel. Otherwise, where something shows up for people is rarely where actually needs to be treated. But in the case of low vessels, like when you have a rash or a bruise or discoloration, any kind of like skin thing that, is visible to the eye, that is like a red flag for me thinking about low vessels. It is drawing my attention to that place. And this is something that I do on myself. And I should have said before I even got started, I have had, I think, all the lows and I don't have a single tattoo. So it's totally possible to not have tattoos and still have these low channels, right? But if you have tattoos, that is a really good sign that you have these low channels active in your body, because the fact that you went to get a tattoo is showing literally the darkened area, right? You get tattoos in color. It could be dark, it could be light, but there's literal, like a physical representation now on top of your skin. And so that for me is very, very interesting. I love to ask people about their tattoos, when they got them, what was going on in their life. Obviously, some tattoos are memorializing sometimes other people, children, or a lot of times commemorating a special event that they had. And I think those stories are so, so fascinating about why it is that they chose to get the tattoo in the first place, and then also the placement of it. So The next component that I wanted to talk about today is how we treat the lows. I touched on this earlier, but because the low vessels form when we have something that needs to be put into the blood for storage, it's like a storage unit using the blood. But when we haven't been able to deal with it and it's still there, we can get things like lumps and bumps, nodules, cysts, all those types of things, because as that vessel is full and can no longer hold more, it starts to spill out back toward what it was designed to protect in the first place. And so the body, as another protective mechanism, takes what we call damp in Chinese medicine and puts a little roadblock between the innermost area of the body, or we can think about just like as simply as the organs, and this pathology that is basically being unleashed. It's overflowing, it's gotten loose a little bit. So when you think about things that you have experienced yourself with lumps and bumps on your body, or things that your friends and family have had, a lot of people get cysts drained or removed, right? This is a good indication that they have had low vessels holding for them for a while and they haven't gotten around to process. And so in the process of overflowing, they've gotten this lump and bump as another way to protect them, the body's way of protecting itself. Okay, so we can treat that as well. And how we treat the lows is that we take a lancet and we poke, as my daughter calls it, the low point on that channel. Now, if you are familiar with modern acupuncture, whether you're a layperson like a patient of modern acupuncture or you are an acupuncturist, again, there are a lot of misperceptions about what bleeding means in the modern acupuncture circle. A lot of people will say, oh, if a patient is really weak or sick or disabled, we should never bleed them. This is a gross misunderstanding of why we are bleeding. Modern acupuncture will bleed something to release what they call excess. Now, when we are bleeding the low channels, it's true that we are releasing heat, but that heat has occurred because the body was holding. Remember, I mentioned earlier that the low vessels form to hold pathology away from the functioning of your body. It's protective. It's like a storage unit that we're going to just set this right over here. How many times do you go look in your storage unit, right? Not very often. If you have a storage unit, you put stuff in there and generally speaking, you forget about it, or you come back to it a year later when you say, I got to get this stuff cleaned out. It's driving me crazy. Okay. Same concept here. So we've put it over in storage, but unlike a storage unit, it takes effort to hold that pathology in the low vessel. So if you can imagine me giving you something heavy, or maybe not even that heavy, but just let me put it in your hand like this. You hold your hand out. How long can you hold your hand out holding this thing before you become exhausted? So that your muscle is going to start feeling hot and aggravated from holding your hand out for so long. That's how we get the heat. The heat comes from the stagnation of holding something in this vessel and without dealing with it. So it is true that low vessels do release heat, and heat can be seen as excess when you water it down enough to see it that way. But when you really dive into the intricacies of Chinese medicine, you realize that heat is just a product of either one, stagnation, well, usually always stagnation in some form, or because your fluids are deficient, your mediumship is deficient. And this is like thinking about a car running out of oil and you see it on the side of the road, like smoking, right? The reason it's smoking is because the engine didn't have enough oil, right? And so that situation has created heat in the car. Does that car have some sort of excess? I mean, maybe the smoke you don't want to be there for sure, but why did it happen? So we need to like back up a few steps and look at the why. So bleeding low treatments are very, very safe and very effective because when you release the pathology from that vessel, then the blood is able to go back into circulation to do all the other functions. And in Chinese medicine, blood is like gold. We want as much blood as possible. We want good quality blood, and we don't need it long term to be holding something that we otherwise could release. So, as always, I'm talking about classical Chinese medicine here. when I say you don't have enough blood, this does not refer to the allopathic view of blood that we have, whatever, 6 or 8 units. I can't remember what it is. That's not what this means. This is a Chinese medicine term, but when we are talking about Chinese medicine, we need to be fully in it. And that's what I want you as the listener to start to understand. Like, I think that people are smart and capable of learning. And so I want to bring you along on this so that you can learn more about Chinese medicine, like the real deal Chinese medicine, because modern training is getting farther and farther away from what true Chinese medicine is. And as that happens, the results get weaker and weaker. And if we can return the practice to the original medicine, and that is no pun intended, like quite literally, if we can return it to what can be closer to the original medicine, we're going to get much better results for our patients. You as the patient are going to get much better results. People are going to be happier with Chinese medicine. Practitioners are going to be happier in their practices. So many people are leaving the practice of Chinese medicine. Our schools are closing down. So this is just my little like side thing that I wanted to say about the importance of really returning to a deep understanding of the medicine versus getting caught up in the modern acupuncture teachings, because in most cases they're so watered down that we've lost the underlying meaning. Back to the low channels and tattoos. When we see tattoos, that is a darkened area, right? And this is exactly how we treat the low channels. So that is a huge diagnostic bonus, let's call it, when somebody comes in and they have a tattoo. Or maybe like I get somebody on the table and I'm about to take their pulse, and maybe they take off their shoes and then socks, and then I see that they have something on their ankle. Like, it's amazing. Or like I start to do another treatment based on their pulse, and then I pull their pants leg up, and then there's a tattoo like on the side of their calf. All the low channels are associated with different emotions. So without even knowing the channels and the emotions, a lot of times, like the presence of vessels or discoloration, or again, tattoos, tell me that there's something going on for a person right here. The sign for me is kind of like, hey, look right here, pay attention. And I've seen incredible results for people, especially with skin problems in general, rashes that just like full body rashes that come on, nobody knows what they are. And so again, like we can think about tattoos in the same way. Like when somebody has a sleeve, that is just so fascinating to me. I love to see what's on the sleeve, like even what the colors are that they use. Like some people keep a monochromatic look, right? And then other people use bright colors. I just think that this is a really interesting thing to talk and think about. And again, in the clinic, it's really diagnostic for me where people put their tattoos. So this is the connection between tattoos and low vessels, especially. There can always be multiple ways to treat anything, but I just wanted to talk about what I start thinking about when I see tattoos and when I'm noticing, not just in the clinic, but just like when I'm around anywhere and I see people's tattoos. I'm always curious about, oh, that's in this location, so that's on, XYZ channel. And so perhaps like at the time they got this, they were feeling this. And a lot of times, I mean, it's really spot on. It's really interesting to me. I hope it's interesting to you as well. I think tattoos are so interesting. Body modification is interesting. And a lot of times it really is calling attention to ourselves in that place. And the other thing in this episode that I wanted to talk about, not the same but related topic, is one of my friends the other day who has a lot of skin problems, who has yet to come in and have me treat her, was saying that when her skin flares up and she gets really itchy and she starts like uncontrollably scratching, when it gets to the point where her skin bleeds, the itching stops and she feels better. And she was asking me about this the other day because she said, I thought about you talking about the low channels because that seems like what you've been telling me that you do and use in your practice. And I was like, exactly. So anything that is like that, like a lot of people say that tattooing becomes very addictive, that they really like the idea of getting ink and that they feel better afterwards. This could also be the same thing as cutting. Like when people are cutting themselves, they are trying to release something. And low vessel treatments are a way to release, but obviously in a more controlled environment because we are being very specific. Now, I should also say, as a part of this episode, please don't just go like bleeding yourself, like poking yourself anywhere with the lancet. That's not how the low channels work. We do need to begin the treatment with the low point. So there's a certain channel. And if you're not familiar with that language of channel, think about it like a roadmap. Think about it as like a street. You have to be on the right street, and you've got to start where the street begins when you're doing a low treatment. So it's just not like any vessel that you see on your body, you can just poke it real quick with a lancet and that's a low treatment. I mean, you do you, you can do whatever you want to do, but that is not a low treatment. We need to open that channel to communicate to the body, hey, this is what we're going to do. We're going to help you take a load off today. We're going to release this heat, the stagnation. We're going to put the resource that you're using to hold this here back in circulation. And then you're going to feel so amazing. That's going to be super supportive, right? But that is essentially, without knowing it, what someone who is cutting does, because they are having feelings that they maybe can't quite pinpoint, that they don't know how to deal with. Again, this is the language of the lows. Often we don't have the capacity to deal with an emotion, and so we put it into the lows. Someone might be also experiencing that and instead choose to cut themselves. And then they, after cutting, feel relief. They feel better. So I think that's a very interesting similarity between tattoos, between cutting, between my friend saying my skin was driving me crazy, but then I scratched too much and then it bled. But then interestingly, I felt so much better. It just stopped itching because she was releasing. And so I think if I can ever get her to come in to have me officially treat her, she will get so much benefit because we'll be able to, in a very controlled, systematic way, choose the channels that she needs based on where her skin eruptions happen, where the rash is happening, and then choose the channel associated with that. And then that way we can offload that for her. Another really interesting similarity is that a lot of women say before their periods, before they bleed, they feel like a sense of stagnation. They feel kind of like a grr like sense. And then when they start bleeding, they feel back to their normal selves. And I think this is the same kind of thing. You're creating a little bit of stagnation as your body consolidates the blood that it is going to then release when you have the bleeding part of a cycle. And then once that blood has moved, then it has relieved the stagnation, just as we do in low channel treatment. So a lot of times when I talk to people about these examples, they're like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Like, I used to cut myself when I was younger, and that is how I felt. Or people will say, yeah, I have had periods like that where I felt kind of like frustrated and stagnant before I started bleeding. And then once I bleed, I feel great. So I think that there are a lot of common things that happen to us or to people we know, or just like we hear about, that can be explained by the low channels. And then there's one more like example that I wanted to share too. A friend of mine posted on Facebook a picture of his tattoo that had a rash coming up from it. And I thought that this was so fascinating. He was asking, does anyone else have this trouble? Have you ever experienced this? This is an old tattoo that I've had for years, but periodically, like, I get this rash that comes up through it, and it was just like raised bumps on the skin. And for me, that was just like so clearly a low. Now, there could also be other pathology involved. As I talked about last week, I was talking about how pathology moves from one class of channels, like the low channels, and then when it's full there, it can go into the divergent channels. So someone who has had a tattoo for a long time has likely filled the low channels. And so then any additional pathology that this person experiences is probably going to go into the divergent channels, and it's going to be held there for a while and it's going to be just fine. But then when new things come in, the divergent channels are going to run out of capacity to hold for him. And so then the rash starts coming up through the tattoo. So the emotion that probably was driving his choice of tattoo and his location of tattoo, which I believe was like on his shoulder, is likely connected to the feelings that he's having that are eliciting the rash coming out in that same location. I hope you're following that. I hope I'm being clear as I describe that. But basically, just to recap that section, what I'm trying to say is that the low channels will most likely be affected first if there is room. So you have an emotion or an experience, or like, let's even say the lows can also hold environmental pollutants. So these are the things that we ingest, that we breathe in, that we put on our skin. We can't bubble wrap ourselves. Like, we're going to be exposed to all this stuff. So there's already going to be some junk being held in the body. But then if we over and over and over and over do it, like, we're continually exposing ourselves to the environmental pollutants, or we're continually exposing ourselves to the emotion that we can't move through, the low channels are going to get really full. They're not going to have room to hold anymore. So they're going to send it to another group of channels that are called the divergent channels. And so when the divergents run out of their resource, then the rash is going to come up. And I think it's interesting that in this friend's case, his rash came up through the very tattoo, that the pathology came up through the low that he created for himself by putting a tattoo in that area. I just think that is so fascinating. So again, today we are talking about tattoos and what they're telling us. And tattoos, generally speaking, are directing our attention to the channel on which it is placed. And so it tells us something about maybe what you were feeling, what you were experiencing when you got the tattoo. And this whole episode has been about specifically tattoos, but I don't, as I mentioned, have any tattoos, and I've had lots of low pathology that I regularly bleed myself, and I find it extremely helpful. Other people that I know and people that I've treated plenty of people with lows who don't have tattoos. So it doesn't mean that if you don't have any tattoos, it doesn't that you don't have any low pathology, or that you couldn't benefit from a low vessel treatment. I think pretty much everyone could benefit from a low vessel treatment. And I just want to throw this in there, that if you found this interesting and you're curious about what it would be like to have a bleeding treatment, and you're brave enough to do it yourself, which I know you are, I have a mini course on my website. It is teaching you with text, with video, and I also have charts for how to locate, and I show you in the video how to locate the point. This is only 2 pokes because it's only 2 channels that pertain to worry and anger. These are the spleen and the liver channels. And I just started there with this little mini class. It's $47. You get lifetime access. I tell you everything that you need to get. Everything that you need is basically you can get at a drugstore or order online. It's very easy. And because it's such a tiny lancet, it's not deep, you're not going to injure yourself at all. So very safe for you to do at home. And so if you're interested, I just wanted you to know that is available for you. Thanks so much, y'all, for listening to this episode and joining me here on the Original Medicine Podcast. I really enjoy talking about Chinese medicine. So if you have suggestions for future topics, or you have questions about what we've been talking about today, please connect with me on Instagram and let's get your questions answered and continue the conversation.